Welcome to the Matt Bernier Show.
What's going on? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show on DRF TV, live.drf.com, live stream, Twitter, Facebook. Any way you want to watch the show live, you can. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. If you check this thing out, podcast version, whether it's visual or just audio, you've got YouTube, you've got iTunes, you've got SoundCloud, you've got video.drf.com. Plenty of ways for you to find this show. Today, as this show is airing, it is Friday, February the 24th. This show has been recorded a week plus in advance simply because I'm not here. So I needed to find something that was going to be a little bit timely, or at least remain topical. Now, I understand things are going to change a little bit. And what I'm going to call this today anyway is the first of 3 progress reports. Remember when you were in school, or if you have kids, or you know people, whatever, maybe you are a kid. You shouldn't be watching the show if you are a child, but that's neither here nor there. Remember you had progress reports, and it wasn't quite a report card, but it was basically letting you know how you're doing, ultimately trying to get to the end of the term or the end of the semester, whatever it may be. Well, I figured what the heck, we've got enough of a body of work from some of these horses, some of these 3-year-olds anyway, to say, let's see how they're doing, how they're progressing. Now, the reason I say you're going to have to bear with me a little bit is because knowing by the time this airs, you're going to have had 3 other major events happen. You're going to have had the Southwest Stakes at Oaklawn Park. You're going to have had the El Camino Real Derby. And you're going to have had the Hyacinth out in Japan at Tokyo, meaning one horse will 100% be in the Kentucky Derby. That's the winner, possibly the winner of the race out in Japan. It's going to ultimately come down to points, but that's basically what I'm saying is one of those horses out in Japan is going to be in the starting gate, so this list that you'll see momentarily will change, and then obviously points will be awarded in both the El Camino Real as well as the Southwest Stakes. So this list that we're about to take a look at, if you're watching this thing, whether it's live or it's in podcast on YouTube, any of those, this is the top 26. The reason I have 26 is because you have a tie down toward the bottom. This is the top 26 as of February the 15th. Again, things will change a little bit, but as you can see, 1 through 10, you have Classic Empire, El Ari, McCracken, Gormley, Gunavera, Practical Joke, Uncontested, Looking at Lee, Irish War Cry, Mastery, as we turn the page to 11 through 20. You have Motown, Guest Suite, Royal Mo, IRAP, Wild Shot, True Timber, No Dozing, Bonus Points, Klimt, Hot Sean, and then you have 21 through 26, Dangerfield, Cindergaard, Taprit, Petrov, Untrapped, and American Anthem. The other thing that's going to be interesting about this list is not only are you going to have some changes just based on what happens coming up, but also the day after this show airs, whether you're watching it live right now on Friday the 24th or you listen to it afterward, you're going to have the Risen Star coming up, so you'll have some points that'll be awarded there as well. So this list isn't going to be as tight as I'd like it to be, but again, needed something that was going to be topical or at least relative a week in advance. So the idea of the sort of progress report is, let's just go right in order, 1 through 26. Some of them will take a little bit more time than others. I don't know if this show is going to be 20 minutes. I don't know if it's going to be 15. I don't know if it's going to be 35. But we're going to go right in order, 1 through 26, and see, for better or for worse, how we feel about each one of these horses. Let's start off right at the top with Classic Empire. Obviously, his 3-year-old debut, not what everybody had hoped for. We thought big things were going to be coming for this horse, particularly on the heels of this effort. This was him in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile at Santa Anita.
3 rules are swimming in deeper waters today. 3/16 from home, and Classic Empire clear by 2.5 lengths to Not This Time, who's finishing on determinedly. He's wandering about just a tad. Classic Empire to the 16th, about 1.5 lengths. Not This Time is gradually wearing him down. Classic Empire, Not This Time. Classic Empire by a neck, Not This Time.
A very impressive performance, very gutsy performance. The 102 Beyer speed figure he earned, obviously the highest for the 2-year-olds. And I talked about it a couple weeks ago on the show that, 2-year-olds that earn triple-digit Beyers, they're not very common, and they usually are sort of the beginning of bigger and better things. I don't want to hold the holy bull against him, considering it was his first start off the layoff, and we've seen that he's a good horse. But then there is a part of me that looks at it and says, well, with the exception of the 102, he's never broken 90. Now, I'm not trying to say that he's, some sort of bum and he can't run. Obviously, he's a talented animal. He's a bit of a nut job. We know that. Well documented. He needs to iron some things out. But I think this is a horse that if for some reason the next start, wherever it may be, and he had a foot abscess and it seems to have, sort of healed itself and he's okay now. But let's just say hypothetically he throws in a dud in whatever his next start is. Now we're going to have to start looking at it saying, well, what was the 102 legitimate, or did he beat maybe a suspect group? I don't want to go that far because I think thus far the Breeders' Cup Juvenile has acquitted itself very nicely, the entire field. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say just off of the bench, he needed one. He didn't really run his race. He was a hot, sweaty mess when they shipped him over the morning of, and you saw him. He was all lathered up, but he was completely empty in the Holy Bull. I'm going to basically draw a line through it and say I know he's better than that. I think he's better than that. If he throws in another clunker, we've got a major, major issue here as far as the Kentucky Derby is concerned. Right now, yeah, I mean, you've got to be a little bit concerned if you're someone backing him at a short price. But we know Classic Empire is a talented animal. Hopefully, he rights the ship in his second start as a 3-year-old. We move on to this number 2 horse on the current Kentucky Derby point standings. He has 20 points. He's in a 3-way tie for second. El Arib, we're going to take a look at his horse card right now, and you can see his connections and some of the other things that go along with him. The thing about El Arib is he really hasn't done anything wrong. He's ripped off 4 consecutive victories. The smallest margin of victory in those 4 was 4 1/4 lengths. That was most recently in the Withers, and he was geared down. I like that he sat off of the pace in the Withers. The Jerome, he sort of passed the wet track test. That was no sort of issue. He's won it 3/4 of a mile. He's won it a mile and a 16th. Pedigree-wise, you wonder how far ultimately he's going to want to go. But thus far, and I know maybe he feels too much like some of these other horses we've seen over the past handful of years that they get all the points early and you don't know once the big boys show up and once the water gets deeper, maybe they don't acquit themselves quite as well as they had earlier on in the season and earlier on in the campaign. I have nothing to knock about this horse. It feels like, is he going to be the one this year that just continues to prove doubters wrong? And I don't mean that from a wagering standpoint because you see he hasn't been, with the exception of the Withers, he hasn't been some overwhelming favorite really in any one of his races. He's taken money, but he hasn't been some 1-9 shot. It feels like when bigger, sort of more fashionable connections and names show up, maybe he's going to get lost in the shuffle. Maybe he's the horse this year that outruns his pedigree and just continues on with it, does things professionally. Who knows? Maybe he is the horse this year that's going to take us all a little bit by surprise. He is number 2 currently, tied in a 3-way tie for second at 20 points. 20 points we've talked about also on the show in the past handful of weeks. 20 has kind of been that threshold. I'm sure 25, that basically will seal your fate and you'll be in. But 20 has historically been the bubble as far as these points are concerned. I think El Arib's an interesting horse. Right now, he hasn't done anything wrong. If you're a backer of him or if you're a fan, you've got to be pleased. You can't be, there's nothing, he's basically the complete opposite of Classic Empire, where you're a little bit concerned. You know he's a talented animal, but he's going to have to prove it to you. All El Arib does is go out and win races. Right now, you've got to be tickled pink if you're a fan of El Arib. We move on to number 3. This is McCracken. I believe he is now the current favorite out in Las Vegas for the Kentucky Derby, or at least co-favored, if not right there. He goes out for Ian Wilkes. Obviously, Brian Hernandez Jr. has the mount. He is unbeaten from 4 lifetime starts. He made his 3-year-old debut last Saturday, and I say last Saturday again, knowing that I'm taping this on Thursday the 15th. So 2 weeks ago, when you guys are all watching this or listening to it, let's take a look to Sam F. Davis turning for home. McCracken.
Swings to the center of the racetrack, and Hernandez has him in full stride as they're into the stretch. Wild Shot strikes to the lead. McCracken on the outside, gaining with every stride, and now collars the leader. Here's McCracken on the outside. Hernandez goes to the left-handed whip, drifts in slightly, but McCracken remains unblemished and will take this Sam Davis. Tap Red is flying on for second.
And look, he's done nothing wrong. It's hard to knock a horse that's done nothing wrong. I don't think he's visually spectacular, but guess what? You don't have to be spectacular. He's professional. He goes out and gets the job done. He has a running style coming from off the pace we've seen in the past that work in Kentucky Derbies. The concern always becomes traffic. He's gotten beautiful rides from Brian Hernandez each and every time. He's done everything right. He's weaved his way through traffic. He's decided when the right moment was to tip out and go wide. The Derby, look, anytime you're coming from way out of it, you're going to be at the mercy of trip and pace. You would imagine the pace is going to materialize, but we've seen recently, we've had these sort of pedestrian fractions. We've seen 47 half miles. We've seen 48 half miles. He's going to need a little bit of pace. He's going to need a little bit of racing luck with the running style. But thus far, it's hard to knock a horse that all he does is go out and win. He has a 95 as his career best buyer for Ian Wilkes. Wilkes knows a thing or two about getting horses ready for big races, obviously under the tutelage of Carl Nafsker, as well as training Fort Larned to win the Breeders' Cup Classic a handful of years ago. McCracken, nothing to knock about him at 4 for 4. Let's move on to Gormley. We're going to take a look at his horse card right now. A horse that I've always been a fan of. I was a little bit dubious going into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I was also a little bit dubious going into the Sham. We're going to talk about the Sham. We'll see that later on. But thus far, The big concern for me was to see if this horse could actually sit off of a target and make a move. Well, he did that in the sham again. We'll see the actual visual evidence of that later on. If he continues to improve like this and he continues to take steps forward, I think he's very, very interesting. He earned a 93 as a 2-year-old, albeit outright on the lead walking at Santa Anita, and that was when sort of the running of the race was jacked up a little bit because of traffic and a riderless animal. He comes off the bench. He's checked the sloppy track. That's not going to be a problem for him. We know that. Distance shouldn't be an issue for him. He's already won at a mile and a 16th, and it looks like distance is only going to be his friend. I think there's a lot to like about this horse, particularly if he can if he can rate and relax kindly, which it looks like he's sort of learning and developing. If he can do that, all of a sudden he just has that added dimension of a horse that, okay, you don't have to come from 150 out of it, but you also don't have to be outright on the lead. If he can learn to relax a little bit more even, I'm not just saying, sit a head or a neck or a half length off. If he can learn to sit off of a target by a length and a half, I think all of a sudden Gormley becomes a giant, giant player. He already is a giant, giant player when we're talking about the first Saturday in May, not only because of his running style, not only because of his accomplishments, because of points. Right now, they're in a beautiful position with this horse. He has 20 points to his name. Again, we've talked about it. That's been historically the bubble. You would imagine he's going to get some more points in these prep races upcoming. There's a lot to like about Gormley if you're backing him for John Sheriff's. And again, that doesn't hurt that you've got connections that know how to win big races. John Sheriff's, the Mosses, Victor Espinoza with the mount. Let's move on to Gunnavera. He's number 5 on the list. He has 14 points currently for Antonio Sano. Javier's ridden him in arguably 3 of his best races, most recently the Holy Bull. He won the Delta Jackpot. He also won the Saratoga Special from way off of it. I was encouraged by the Holy Bull. I feel like he was sort of the horse that slipped through the cracks as far as storylines are concerned for that race, simply because he was much closer to the pace than he had been. And I say much closer. It's not like he was pressing it, but he was 4 lengths off of it throughout different stages of the running. I think that's going to be very, very important. You look at the pedigree, I think he's going to run all day. But he had been a one-run closer, and he hadn't run particularly fast. He moves up to a 91 in his 3-year-old debut. If he takes another step forward, let's say he moves up to a 95, or he moves up to 100, or he at least flirts with 100, all of a sudden this becomes an interesting horse. I don't know if I want to consider him sort of a proper win candidate, and the good thing is I don't need to decide that right now in the 3rd week in February. Again, this is a progress report. We're trying to work toward the ultimate goal the first Saturday in May. But if he continues to just take these little steps forward, particularly with that sort of added professionalism and that added dynamic where he can be a little bit closer to the pace, all of a sudden Gunnavera becomes interesting at what should be a reasonable number, I would imagine. Again, he kind of get lost in the shuffle between the bomb from Classic Empire and the winner, Irish Warcry, who we'll talk about shortly. But Gunnavera, I think, is an interesting runner going forward, one to keep an eye on. Don't love that he's been sort of habitually late to change leads a little bit, but that's just me being a little bit nitpicky. Let's move on to number 6, Practical Joke, Chad Brown. Maybe this is going to be Chad's Derby horse. We haven't seen him just yet, but it sounds like everything is going well. All systems go. You see a steady sort of pattern as far as the workout tab is concerned going back to January 17th. Last I had heard, they're talking or weighing sort of options between Florida and New York. If he comes up to New York, maybe he has a date with El Arib. Maybe El Arib doesn't go in a race like the Gotham. We'll find out. Wherever they go, Practical Joke is another horse. It's hard to knock him. There's really not anything he's done wrong throughout his career. He's 3 for 4 lifetime. He hit the board in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. The interesting thing about him is you can go back to his Hopeful. Now, the Hopeful, obviously, when Classic Empire wheeled and dumped the rider, the dynamics change a little bit, but he can at least be reasonably close, and that was in a sprint race. I'm going to be very interested to see where he ultimately sets up shop, because he won the Champagne from well off of it, and I understand that was a blistering pace. But the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, he was mid-pack. If he can be a little bit closer even, if he can be a length and a half, 2 lengths off of a 46 or a 47 half mile, all of a sudden Practical Joke becomes an interesting one. He's another one. I look at it, I'm always dubious of the Into Mischiefs about how far ultimately they're going to want to go. I wonder if he's going to be a better middle distance horse than maybe a true classic distance horse. But Practical Joke, another one. I have no knock. And you see a theme here, with the exception of Classic Empire, and again, I'm going to give him a mulligan. There's a reason these horses are already at the top of the list, and I think you're already starting to see sort of a separation between the cream of the crop, the very good, and then the sort of figuring things out. And then you've got a couple of horses that are still on the radar that they haven't had an opportunity to run for points yet. So you're starting to already see tiers sort of form of quality here. And again, we'll find out. That's the beautiful thing about this anything can happen over the next handful. We got, what, 2.5, 3 months before the Derby is run. It'll be interesting to see how things continue to shake down. Practical Joke, no knocks with him. Let's move on to Uncontested, a very interesting runner for Wayne Catalano. Broke the debut, or broke the maiden, I should say, in the debut. Just open lengths, aired, beat a nice horse in Untrapped, who we'll talk about in a little bit, at 6.5 furlongs. 89 buyer at first ask, and comes back in the Kentucky Jockey Club. Out there, sets the pace, fades down the lane, loses to McCracken. I don't want to hold that race against him. You see, he's number 7 on this list with 11 points. I believe he'll be running in the Southwest Stakes. This would have been last Monday for all of you that are watching it live or listening in podcast version. The Smarty Jones, he comes back. I know the fractions look legitimate. They were 23, 46, and 1, 10 and 3 for 3/4. It was over a sloppy track down at Oaklawn, but he had the easiest time of it out there. I'm also a little bit concerned about the Tis Wonderfuls. They're usually much more precocious than they are onward training. Not suggesting he can't. He's in very capable hands of Wayne Catalano. I just there's a couple of things I want this horse to prove to me. I want to see, can you actually sit off of a target? Because I think you're in trouble with any horse that absolutely needs to have the lead if you're thinking first Saturday in May. Thus far, he's been on the lead in all 3 of his starts. It'll be interesting to see ultimately where he gets positioned going forward. If he needs the lead, for me, that's a bit of a red flag. I don't know how far he's going to want to go. I don't know if he's going to train on with the pedigree. Again, the connections I'm cool with. I have no problem with them. I think that's going to be a positive for him going forward. But for me, he still has a few things to prove. The good thing is they have the points in their back pocket of 11 where they know, okay, well, even if we don't win, we're going to get some points and we can move forward. Uncontested, he's got big speed figures. The 96 he earned in that Smarty Jones, that makes him a primetime contender in here. We'll see if he trains on and if he is truly a need-to-lead type. If he is, I think he's in a little bit of trouble. But Uncontested thus far, again, I really have no knocks against him. Looking at lead number 8 on this list, Steve Asmussen knows a thing or two about winning big races. The big knock for this horse, there are a couple. Let's just be honest. I think he's a nice horse. I've liked him for some time. He's a one-run closer. We talked about it similarly with McCracken. Now, McCracken's, I think, a little bit handier than this horse is, but one-run closer, you're always going to be at the mercy of pace and trip. And from a speed figure standpoint, he's just slow on paper right now. Luckily, he has not made his 3-year-old debut yet. He looks like he's training well down at the fairgrounds for Asmussen. Distance shouldn't be a problem for him. You see the pedigree just at face value, looking at Lucky by a Langfield mare. I think that, look, he could be the sort of horse right now, if you're projecting way in advance, and who knows, I would hope he's going to improve. He's going to need to if he's going to be competitive, but maybe he's the kind of horse that you don't rely on to win a race like the Kentucky Derby, but maybe he's the one that can come along, get a piece at a big number from the back of the pack. Irish War Cry, sort of the hot horse of the moment before McCracken showed up, and then all of a sudden it's just, we as horse players and fans are as guilty as anyone of sort of being the dog that sees the new shiny thing or the car that drives by. You're fascinated by that one until the next one comes and you're fascinated by that and just keep churning it out. Irish War Cry gets the job done in the Holy Bull. He looks fantastic, and then all of a sudden he's forgotten because of McCracken and what he does in the Sam F. Davis. I know this was outright on the lead. I know he was a little bit green with the lead change, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. They turn for home. This is Irish War Cry winning the Holy Bull.
Peru getting serious on Classic Empire. He's asking him for his best, but he's still 2 lengths off the lead. Canavera to his outside, and they turn for home in the Holy Bull. And Irish War Cry set down for the drive by Joel Rosario and maintains a 2-length lead. And he's strong up front. Canavera can only watch and wonder from second. Then Classic Empire third. Well back to the others, but the Holy Bull to Irish War Cry. Gate to wire.
I get the feeling, I could be entirely wrong, I think there's a lot of potential here. Now, if it's not Derby, I just think long-term. This is a horse, you look at him run, and you just look for little nuances. You saw how late he was to change leads, and you saw Joel Rosario really get him over to the right lead. And you saw him with his head, not cocked, but he was certainly not straight as an arrow. To me, it's not because there is a physical issue with this horse or anything like that. I just think he doesn't know what he's doing yet. And that's a scary thought, for knowing that he's under the care of Graham Motion, who's won a Kentucky Derby in the past, one of the best conditioners we have in North America, if not the world. I think that's a scary sort of thought, that this is a horse that's still figuring it out. He's got top-notch connections, and he's already one of the fastest ones in the entire lot. He's shown he doesn't need to have the lead. His career debut, he won from 8 out of it. He broke very, very slow. I think there's a lot to like about this horse. It'll be interesting to see ultimately Now I think going 2 turns, you're going to want to see if he can answer that question. Does he rate kindly? Does he sit off of a target? Because I'm sure they don't want to get him turned into some sort of one run, go right to the front sort of speed-crazed animal. I think there's a lot to like here about this horse. He's done nothing wrong in his career. He's 3 for 3, the 97 buyer in the Holy Bull. He's defeated arguably 2 of the highest rated and the highest ballyhooed or most ballyhooed horses in the entire crop with Gunavera and Classic Empire. I think there's a lot to like about Irish War Cry. If I had to make a top sort of list, he would certainly be toward the top. Irish War Cry, I think, is a major, major threat as far as the Kentucky Derby is concerned, if he continues to train on it all as well. Let's round out the number top 10. We'll continue on because there's a tie for the top 10 anyway. With Mastery for Bob Baffert, and the boys in the back, the producers, they said, wow, you know, Mastery, for a horse that he's only raced 3 times and he's toward the top of lists and people talk about him, we haven't seen him in a long time. That's not incorrect. I mean, this is a horse we haven't seen since really early in December, and that was as a 2-year-old. He's gone 2 turns 1 time. I think a lot of people are very skeptical of what he beat in the Los Alamitos Futurity. I thought it was a very, very good effort. Let's take a look at the horse card for Mastery if we could. I didn't love the fact that Baffert went back and forth with the blinkers. Normally, when he takes them off in the second start in a graded stake, they're off for good, and he means well, and these horses are going to end up being good things. They went right back on in the Los Al Futurity, and that bothered me a little bit, but again, maybe I'm making too much of just looking at the raw numbers and not factoring in how the track was playing and speed and pace figures and with Timeform US and things like that. And I'll have to, I'm sure, as we go forward and once he does make his return to the races. He pressed a 45 3/2 mile and drew off and won by 7. Maybe he wasn't beating great competition. You saw what IRAP and Dangerfield came back to do. We'll talk about them momentarily. I just think Mastery is a really interesting horse going forward. I think a lot of people, I don't want to say have forgotten about him, but it just feels like it's been forever since we've seen him. And it has been forever. It's been 2+ months. We'll see him shortly, I would imagine, make his 3-year-old debut. But Baffert knows what he's got. And if there's anyone else, would you trust anyone else more than Baffert with a 3-year-old getting ready for the Triple Crown? You name them, I would disagree. I think Baffert is the best at getting these horses ready for this grind. I think Mastery obviously warrants consideration on the short list. Number 11, but tied for 8th, really. We've got, what, a 6-horse tie for 8th, is Motown. Motown for Tony Dutrow is going to be making his seasonal debut, scheduled anyway, to make his seasonal debut tomorrow in the Risen Star if you're watching this live on the 24th. Motown is an interesting horse because, again, another one similar. On paper, as a 2-year-old, really did nothing wrong. Goes out there, breaks his maiden on a wet track, check, no problem with that. 2 turns, mile and an 1/8 Remsen, check, no problem with that. Nice tactical speed, check, no problem with that. Problem is the Remsen right now looks like hot garbage. It looks just terrible. We saw No Dozing come back and bomb in the Sam F. Davis a couple weeks back. It hasn't really, you know, shaken out as one of the best races we've seen. Takaful was beat way, way back. I don't know. We'll find out. Motown looks like he's a professional horse. He's in obviously capable hands of Tony Dutrow. It's going to be interesting to see if all of a sudden he comes out and he gets buried for some reason in the Risen Star. You're going to have to just take a look at that Remsen and basically chuck it out because right now it has been just the opposite of a key race. It's been a negative key race. Motown, if he continues to build, 86 is a 2-year-old, that's a big number, particularly going 9 furlongs. If he continues to move forward, certainly has to be viewed as a contender. We'll wait and see how that race comes down as far as the Remsen is concerned and ultimately what he turns into as a 3-year-old. Guess Sweet is a horse for Neil Howard. Most recently was a winner of the Lecomte down at the fairgrounds over a sloppy, muddy track, or a sealed muddy track. So he's a graded stakes winner already. He's been beaten by McCracken. You can go 3 starts back and you see that on your page. The big knock with him right now is he's slow. He's very similar to looking at Lee. He's slow on paper. He got the 82 buyer in the Lecomte. It sounds like he's moving forward in a big, big way. He logged a 5/8 work on February the 14th and 59-2. You just look at the page, it looks like he's training forward. I think there's a lot to like about this horse. Professionalism is there. That's never been a problem. Pedigree is there on the bottom. You've got AP Indy. You've got Summer Squall. I mean, you've got a lot to like here. Quality Road, Dan Illman has pointed it out. Got off to a bit of a slow start as a stallion. He has turned it around. He's really had a big year last year, and we'll see if he continues on this year as a stallion. He's a gelding, this horse, Guest Sweet. I like him. I like him a lot. The problem is he's slow right now. He has tactical speed, though. He's shown the ability to come from way off of it. He's shown the ability to win, pressing the pace. I think there's a lot to like about Guess Sweet. The only knock right now is he is just slow and he needs to get better. But is that impossible? Again, for a lightly raced 3-year-old, I don't think it is. We move on to Royal Mo. We have a card for you to take a look at. If you're watching this on live.drf.com or live stream, or you're watching the podcast on YouTube or video.drf.com, or if you're watching live on Twitter or Facebook, you see this is another John Sheriff's and Jerry and Ann Moss production. It's another Victor Espinoza production. It's another Uncle Mo. Stop me if you've heard all this stuff before. The problem I have with Royal Mo is I don't know that I entirely believe the Robert B. Lewis as a whole regarding the speed figures. Keep in mind, this is a horse that has 2 victories come out right on the lead. That's not going to work first Saturday in May, particularly when you look at the fractions that he's thrown down. He hasn't been going all that fast. He's had the luxury of soft-ish paces. The Beyer speed figure, if you believe the 94, that makes him a prime-time player as far as the 3-year-olds are concerned. I don't particularly buy into it simply because all 5 of the horses that ran in that race, they all ran career best figs. I understand they're lightly raced 3-year-olds. Maybe it is possible. I just have a hard time. Put it this way. I'll believe it when they come back. And whatever situation, whatever spot they all choose to run in, if they continue to improve or they match, then sure, okay, the speed figure has been validated in Royal Mo. Maybe you got to view him as a true contender. If for some reason maybe they regress or whatever the case may be, then I think it's fair to question overall that fig, that 94, because prior to that, Royal Mo had only earned a 73. I know it was a 2-year-old, but my goodness, 21 points. That's a giant, giant jump. I like to see incremental bumps. I don't want that big jump forward. I want those 5, 6, 7, 8, even 10 points moving forward. I want 20, 21 points at a time. We'll find out. Royal Mo, he looks good on the racetrack. Again, good to beat John Sheriff's and Victor Espinoza and the Mosses right now. We move on to IRAP, a horse that was handled quite easily by Royal Mo most recently. IRAP is a maiden. I don't have much else to say. He's got a beautiful pedigree, and you see this is 11 through 20, not necessarily sort of actually 11, 12, 13, because you can see some of these horses are tied as far as points are concerned. But now we're getting into the territory where these horses need to really prove themselves as true sort of Derby contenders, or maybe we see them ultimately turn back after a couple of shots. IRAP needs to break his maiden 1. You look at the pedigree. Look, he's a half the Speightstown. It's hard not to like that, but thus far, what's he done on the racetrack that's really gotten your blood pumping? He's run second in a couple of graded stakes races. God bless him. I have no problem with that, and I can't knock him. But, I mean, break your maiden first before I really consider you a true contender for the Kentucky Derby. Wild shot for Rusty Arnold. He made his seasonal debut in the Sam F. Davis. I think he's an interesting run. The problem I have with him thus far, I like that he just continues to get better bit by bit. He went from 64 to 65 to 81 to 84 to 90. The problem is he's been handled by McCracken a couple times, and it's on the square. I don't see any sort of reason to think that he's all of a sudden going to jump up in a big, big way and now turn the tables on McCracken. So not only do you need to turn the tables on him, but I don't know, trap shot going longer, that's not my cup of tea. I still think he's going to be a nice horse. Maybe he's going to be a one-turn sort, maybe the Pat Day Mile ultimately. I'm not going to fault the connections to go on with him and say we've got a nice horse, we're going to go on for points and see if we can continue on the road to the Kentucky Derby. But I think ultimately he'll be better one turn, maybe 7/8 of a mile or one-turn mile. True Timber, Kieran McLaughlin. This is a horse that debuted in November at Aqueduct. Then he went over to the inner dirt, broke his maiden. Then they tried stretching him out each of the past 2. He has a couple of graded stakes placings under his belt, but another one. He moved up. He got the 85 Beyer in the Withers. I understand that sounds all well and good. He's by Mine Shaft out of a Tis Now mare. You'd think distance is going to be his friend. He's lightly raced, so maybe there's still some upside here, but he was handled. He was the one that was actually cutting out the fractions in the Withers, and he had nothing for El Arib. El Arib absolutely blew his doors off. He has every right to continue to improve. He's going to need to continue to improve if he's to be viewed as a true contender for the Kentucky Derby. But again, I can't stress enough, this is essentially a progress report. It's the 2nd or 3rd week in February. We have a long, long way to go before we get to the first Saturday in May. So don't write these horses off, but they certainly need to improve. Talk about improve and disappointing. My son, No Dozing. I thought No Dozing was going to run a giant race in the Sam F. Davis. That was going to be his 3-year-old debut, and he was awful. I thought he ran really well in the Breeders' Futurity, a grade 1 at Keeneland last year. He came back. I thought he ran really well in the Remsen, but I already touched on the Remsen. We talked about it with Motown. That Remsen has come back disastrous. He earned a 79 in the Sam F. Davis. His 2 prior starts, he had earned 81 and 82 Beyer speed figures. I wonder if there's a case to be made. One, you can be kind and say, first start as a 3-year-old, first start off the layoff, maybe didn't like Tampa, it can be a little bit of a quirky racetrack, give him the benefit of the doubt. On the flip side, there can be a case to be made that 81, 82, 79, he's just not getting any better. I think that's entirely possible. It's far too early to really make a strong sort of conclusion whether you think he's, no good anymore or he just hasn't gone on with it, or if you think he just needed one, he had a bad day, draw a line through it. No dozing, needless to say, regardless of where you stand on him, if he's to be viewed as a true contender for the Derby, he's going to need to move forward in a big, big way off the heels of a disappointing effort in the Sam F. Davis. We move on to bonus points for Todd Pletcher, which, funnily enough, it's the first time Pletcher's name has showed up on this list, and it's bonus points. A $35,000 son of Majestic Warrior out of a not-for-love mare. This is a horse that his career best Beyer is an 80 in the Withers. I don't have anything right now that tells me Kentucky Derby candidate. He's there because of points. He's won on a wet track. 2 of his best races have come on wet tracks. I don't have a heck of a lot else to add. He's just not for me. I think there's a very real scenario where this is a horse that, when all these other horses that are on the fringe or haven't run in points races yet, when they start to come along, I think you may see him off the list eventually. Klimt, Art Sherman. I'm not going to touch on this horse for too much, simply because, look, he did a lot of good things as a 2-year-old. He's won Grade 1. He's multiple graded stakes placed. He ran very, very poorly in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Art Sherman has said he's going through a growth spurt, and the Triple Crown right off, just draw a line through it. We're not even going to bother. We're going to wait and bring him back in the summer. I think that's a smart move. Give him some time. If he is actually indeed growing up and maturing, give him some time. Don't rush him along because he's a nice little horse. Klimt, basically, I'm just drawing a line through him. He's on the list, but he's not on the list. Number 20 is Hot Sean for Bob Baffert. It's a horse I've never loved. You look at his overall body of work, I believe he's a half to the long-winded horse that it's a knockout. That was his name for Pletcher and Luis Saez. He's by Flatter. He debuted and he earned a 78. His second lifetime start, he earned a 76. Then he earned a 78, and then he earned a 78. Then he took a little bit of a break. He's come back. He's had a couple of works, but then you've seen some big, big gaps in the workout tab. I don't know what the story is with Hot Sean. Regardless, I don't like him as far as the Derby contender was concerned. Number 21 on the list, Dangerfield. 4 points for Doug O'Neill. I took a shot with him in the Robert B. Lewis because I thought, you know what? I'm going to get a little bit creative. I'm going to draw a line through the Low South Futurity. I'm going to draw a line through the Delta Jackpot. Quirky surfaces, odd configurations. He was awful in the Robert B. Lewis, and he still earned a career best Beyer of 76. I'm a little bit dubious again about that entire figure as a whole. Dangerfield right now, as it stands, not good enough. Don't view him as a true contender for the Kentucky Derby. Syndergaard, Todd Pletcher, supremely talented animal, no denying that. I don't know. He's just now started to get back into the swing of things. And as you take a look, this is 21 through 26 on the list as far as the Derby points are concerned. I don't think they're thinking Derby with him. I don't know for sure. He's just now gotten back on the tab. He was very, very fast New York bred, very, very fast early on. I think he's going to be a monster one-turn horse. I think if I had to make a long-term future bet, give me this horse for the King's Bishop. He's got big, big speed. Pletcher knows how to win big races, obviously. I almost want them to bypass on everything. Don't worry about the Triple Crown. Wait, get this horse ready for one-turn races, whether it's the Woody Stevens or the Pat Day Mile or long-term a race like the King's Bishop. Syndergaard, supremely talented. We'll find out if they try to go on with him. Talk about Todd Pletcher. Here's Tapwrit. Tapwrit all of a sudden becomes an interesting runner. He was the runner-up in the Sam F. Davis. And look, clearly the price tag, they paid 1.2 for him. They thought a lot of him. He's a Tapwrit out of a successful appeal mare, who I believe the mare herself was awful on the racetrack. So obviously something, he had to look like $1 million. Little bit of a slow start. Obviously, the Saratoga race didn't go well, and he was dead on the board. He's 5-1 for a Pletcher firster. That doesn't happen. He's come back. He ripped off 2 consecutive victories, broke his maiden, then he won over a wet track. Then he ran the Sam F. Davis. And I don't understand. A lot of people are saying, he had a bad trip, he had a bad trip. I don't think he had a bad trip at all. I just think he's very green. I think he learned a lot. Jose Ortiz had to get into him in about a half mile to go, and he went on with it. And when he got out to the clear turn, or down the lane, I should say, coming up to the wire, he re-rallied. He finished very, very well. I think this is a horse that distance will be his friend, and I think he's slowly putting it together. He reminds me a little bit of Destin. Destin was a bit of a dope for Pletcher last year, and ultimately we know what he turned into. He went on to run second and lose the Belmont Stakes by a whisker. Tapwrit, I think, is an interesting horse to keep an eye on. I would make the argument out of these horses that we've talked about for Todd Pletcher on the list, Tapwrit is the one that you want to put a ring around as far as possibly being a Derby horse. Petrov, Ron Moquette. This is a horse that has gone out 3 times. He's raced most recently down at Oaklawn Park. That was in the Smarty Jones. No match for Uncontested, but Uncontested had an uncontested lead. This horse was second. It was basically a 2-speed number. They went ring around the rosy. I don't know just yet how I feel about this horse. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's run 2 very competitive races. He's multiple stakes placed. He'll make his graded stakes debut here shortly. I believe he'll be running in the Southwest as well on Monday afternoon, Monday the 18th, 19th, whatever it may be. I don't know how far he's going to want to go. I know he's by Flatterer. I know you got Bertrando on the bottom. I think he may be a nice one-turn horse. I also wonder just ultimately how good he'll end up being. But easy for me to say that. All he's done is continue to improve in all 3 of his starts, and he's a lightly raced horse in capable hands. Petrov, an interesting sort of newer face that maybe we don't know what his ceiling is just yet. Untrapped, number 25 for Steve Asmussen. I've already talked about the trap shot sort of babies. I think they're better going 1 turn. Having said that, the LeCompte, I was very impressed with this horse. I thought he ran very, very well. First time 2 turns, first time off of a little bit of a layoff, first time as a 3-year-old. Asmussen knows how to get horses ready to roll down at the fairgrounds. Obviously, we've seen that in the past with the likes of Gun Runner and some of these other horses that we've seen recently. I think Untrapped is a really interesting horse. I ultimately still believe he'll be a 1-turn horse. But again, easy for me to say. He's slow on paper. He's lightly raced. He can continue to improve and move forward. Untrapped, an interesting runner. Who knows? We'll see what he does if he does run in the Risen Star, which I believe is the plan. The last horse we will talk about on this list, and we'll actually have some visuals to go along with it, is American Anthem for Bob Baffert. He has 4 points. He broke his maiden back in December at Del Mar going 3/4 of a mile. He was green as grass. He was on his left lead for a long time, very un-Baffert-like. Then he comes back in the sham. He makes his 3-year-old debut going 2 turns against a Grade 1 winner in Gormley. And as they turn for home, this is what you got.
Outside with 3/16 left to go, takes the lead by a half length from American Anthem. 6 lengths away then, and the field is Big Hit with an 1/8 left to go. It's Gormley in front, American Anthem second, coming back strongly on the inside. Gormley's ahead in front, American Anthem dogged on his inside. American Anthem lacking experience and seasoning. Gormley, American Anthem, a thriller in the sham. Gormley a nose, American Anthem, 12 lengths to Big Hit.
The 2 of them threw it down the entire length of the stretch. American Anthem and Gormley. I think this horse has a ton of ability, considering he was down on the inside, probably the tougher of the 2 spots, considering it was his first time going 2 turns. He acquitted himself very, very well. Baffert is not afraid to ship out of town. I would imagine you'll see this horse at Oaklawn at some point. I would imagine Mastery will stay in Southern California. This horse, I think, has a ton of ability. I think the ceiling, the sky is the limit. Who knows what the ceiling is? He's Bodemeister by an AP Indy mare. I think there's a ton to like about this horse. So just because he's low on the list, that's simply because he hasn't had many opportunities yet. I think he's going to go forward. I think he's going to acquit himself very, very nicely. I think there is a ton to like about American Anthem for Bob Baffert. He currently has 4 points, but I would imagine, I'm going to venture a guess, that will change in time when he has more opportunities to go and get some points. There is your first report card for the 2017 Kentucky Derby, the leaderboard. Let's take a look at that one more time if we could. 1 through 26. You see it. Classic Empire at 32 points, head of the table. He leads things right now, but we've got a lot of things that can change. And obviously, if you're listening or watching this show right now, this is airing on the 24th. This table is not updated for races like the Southwest or the El Camino Real or the Japanese horse that will 100% be in the field the first Saturday in May, simply because, again, this entire show has been taped in advance. Let's turn the page over to 11 through 20 if we could. You see Motown at the top. That race, the Remsen as a whole, is a little bit questionable going all the way through. These are 10 points through 4 points, and we will quickly cycle through to 21 through 26 on the current list as of February the 15th. Things can certainly change. Certainly change. But right now, that's what you're looking at as far as a primer is concerned. The first progress report on the Matt Bernier Show for the 3-year-olds trying to get to the starting gate the first Saturday in May and the run for the Roses. Saturday, DRF Live. You guys can take a look at this slate right here. It's going to be Dan Illman. It's going to be Mike Beard. They're going to bring you through a good day of racing, obviously top to bottom, right through the end on, well, I'll say it right now. This will be more likely than not the last Saturday regular Saturday of DRF Live anyway. We'll be having a little bit of a tweak coming up in the following week. But there is your slate for Saturday afternoon for the boys. The Friday Formulator race of the day will air right after this show is concluded. If you want to watch this show live, you have live.drf.com, you have live stream, you have Twitter, you have Facebook. If you want to listen to it or watch it again later on, you have YouTube, you have iTunes, you have SoundCloud, you have video.drf.com. Follow on Twitter at DRF Video. That's the DRF TV handle. We have all of our videos that are posted, they're retweeted. You can comment, you can fire away at us if you want to fire away at me directly. At Bernier_Matt, questions, comments, concerns, things you'd like to see on the show, whatever it may be. Without further ado, the Friday Formulator race of the day. Thank you for bearing with me, knowing that this was taped a week in advance. I will see you a week from today, back here, live in the studio, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. The Matt Bernier Show. Best of luck this weekend.